Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the Royal Society of Medicine and In Conversation Live. I'm Suzy Walton, I'm the Vice-President of the RSM. We started these events in 2019 in Wimpole Street, our London HQ, and we've interviewed key thinkers, leaders in different fields and many others. Despite COVID-19 putting the country into lockdown, we are doing all we can to stay connected with our membership and the wider public. So tonight's event comes to you live and via technology. Tonight's guest is a Sunday Times columnist, the former chair of Channel 4 Television, the current chair of the Institute of Cancer Research, which is one of the world's largest cancer laboratories. He's also headed up the Royal Society of Arts. He runs Risk Capital Partners, a private equity house. He used to run the Pizza Express chain. He started the Strada restaurant chain and was chair of the Giraffe restaurants. He's injected capital into dental surgeries, a cruise company, a pub chain, an activity holiday company, a hotel company, bingo clubs. He has 4 honorary degrees, and relevant to our audience tonight, he studied medical sciences at university. I believe he also owns a pier and a 10-pin bowling business. That man is Luke Johnson. Good evening, Luke, and welcome to the Royal Society of Medicine.
Hi, Suzy.
Hi, Luke. I have to start off by saying, do you really own a pier?
Well, I chair a business called the Brighton Pier Group, and that owns Brighton Palace Pier, which has been going since 1899, and I reckon is probably the most visited pier in the world, except perhaps for Santa Monica Pier. We have 4 million visitors a year, and I'm very pleased to say that it is reopening on Saturday. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
I know what it's not. It's not the longest pier, is it? Because I accidentally found myself one day having a walk along a pier, which turned out to be the longest pier in the world. I think that's Southend Pier, isn't it? So that just pips your pier a little bit.
That's right.
But yours is the busiest. Well,
we think so, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, let's hope. So you're reopening on the 4th of July.
Yes, there's 60 piers left across the UK, and very few are self-supporting. Ours is. Many are not really viable and have to be charities or are in danger of collapse. Originally, there were 100. And interestingly, every single pier built in this country was financed from private capital, not from government or council or whatever. Quite interesting.
So piers, as I said in the introduction, is just one of the vast array of things that you have owned, injected money into, run, set up, etc., etc. You genuinely never seem to stand still, Luke. So I think certainly what I want to know, I'm sure what a lot of our audience want to know, is what motivates you and what stands out for you as your proudest achievement in all these things you've done.
I think what motivates me has changed. I think that I like to make things happen. I like to generate activity. I like to create jobs and see things succeed. I like to be busy. I like to innovate and try new things. And, I enjoy the cut and thrust of business and the drama of it all, the uncertainties as well as the successes. And I spend probably, 20 to 25% of my time on non-profit activities, like, for example, the Institute of Cancer Research and the Almeida Theatre, because I think they provide an interesting balance to life. And I feel that things like the arts and medical research are important, and it puts things into perspective. So it's by no means all my work is business, although that's what I've done for 35 odd years.
And what's your proudest achievement to date?
Well, I suppose my proudest achievement is normally the one that I'm most wrapped up with at any one time. And so I would say that right now that's an artisan bakery chain called Gales. We have 60 odd branches, virtually all in London. We also have a very large wholesale bakery in Hendon, which supplies hundreds of restaurants, hotels, bars, etc., cafes. And I'm proud of the fact that we kept trading in at least our core branches right throughout this lockdown. We've now reopened all of them virtually. Also, we've supplied the supermarkets with our baked goods. And, you know, I think the fact that we didn't close, we kept our customers supplied with, you know, what I call an affordable treat, is very gratifying. And now that we are trying to fire on all cylinders again, it's very exciting because, again, from Saturday, we won't be able to just do takeaway. We'll be able to do sit-down business too. So we will be able to be, you know, almost back to how we used to be.
Have you gone back to the shop floor in this pandemic?
Yes, and indeed for a couple of weeks early on, before it became too difficult because of restrictions, I used to collect surplus bread and other things, croissants and whatever, at the end of the evenings from a few branches and go and deliver them to St Mary's and UCL hospitals nearby, which, you know, was very satisfying in a way.
Now, you've been at the helm of companies and ventures, Luke, in really so many different industries. So what do you see as the most important qualities of a good leader or for good leadership?
They have to be good at motivating people. They have to have high energy levels. They have to be ambitious. I think they need to be pretty open and honest with their people. I think, you know, they have to have a vision. I think optimism helps, self-confidence clearly. It's good, I think, if you're articulate, then you can express yourself. I think certainly in businesses or any organizations where there's finance involved, if you're numerate, that's very useful. I think you've got to be good at talent spotting. I think, you know, empathy, so that you can understand what drives people and you can, you know, therefore relate to them. I think a degree of ruthlessness is often necessary, because I don't think you can be too sentimental when you have to take difficult decisions. I think you have to be able to juggle the short and the long term in terms of strategy and where you want the organization or business to go to. You know, there are many other attributes and talents that you require, but I think that's enough to be going on with.
That's quite a collection, quite a basket of competencies there that you've named. Is it true that you haven't always been in business, that at a certain point in your career you wanted to be a doctor and you trained in medical science, I believe?
Well, sort of. I had a grandfather I greatly admired who actually he practiced at St Mary's. He was a gastroenterologist, and so I followed him into medicine, and I did an undergraduate degree in physiology at Oxford, but I didn't qualify and do the clinical part of it, because I discovered business at university, and I realized that I was probably more suited to the world of business. And I suppose I found the potential of the hierarchy and having to do exams through one's 20s, even into one's 30s, if you want to scale the heights in medicine, a little off-putting. I mean, I think doctors generally can have a wonderful career because they can do so many different things. They can obviously treat patients, but they can also do research, they can teach, they can write, they can do NHS work, they can do private practice, they can work in the armed forces and all sorts of other ways in which they can use their qualifications and skills. So actually, I think it's quite an attractive career, alongside the fact that they save lives. So that's good too.
So you say you discovered business at university. Do you mean you discovered the theoretical side of business and you wanted to study it from the academic perspective, or that you were doing something entrepreneurial at university?
Yeah, it was very much the latter, completely non-theoretical. We were hosting these parties in my rooms, and the college said they'd kick me out if we didn't stop. So we went to the local nightclub and persuaded them to let us have the venue on a Monday night for nothing. They took the bar money and we took the door money. And really, it was a turning point in my life on the first evening. We arrived, my partner and I, about 20 minutes before we were due to open the doors, and was already a big queue of people waiting to come in. And I thought, wow, this is so exciting to start something from scratch and to enjoy yourself as well as making money. Seemed to me the best thing ever. So I was hooked really from that moment on. And I have to say, I've never found anything as stimulating as building enterprises, launching products and services, making things work, employing people, promoting people, generating wealth. And, it is the heart of our economic system. And we're going to need a lot more of it in the coming few years, because I'm very sad to say there's a whole avalanche of unemployment about to hit. And so entrepreneurship and wealth creation to pay off the bills of COVID and lockdown is going to be more necessary than ever.
Luke, I've got lots of questions for you, but I must prompt the audience to remind people that we are absolutely live, and you can send us in your questions. The questions have started to arrive, so please keep them coming and I will inject them into the conversation. So Luke, so you did this, you started the entrepreneurial ventures via the nightclub that you were hiring at university. So how did you go from there to your first significant business venture when you left university?
Well, I pursued a double life. So I got jobs working for other people, initially in advertising, and then later on I went into the city and worked as a stockbroking analyst. But at the same time, I was with my business partner from university running various ventures. We had initially nightclub enterprises, and then we had a software business. And the turning point for me in terms of my business career was the takeover of Pizza Express, which happened when I was almost 30. And he and I formed a consortium to buy the business. And we then took it public. And that was very transformational for me in terms of, the scale of enterprise I was involved with, the fact that it was a wonderful brand which had not been fully exploited in terms of being rolled out all across the country. And it was successful as a PLC, and the team we had there with us as our partners running it was very driven, and our timing was very fortuitous. It was 1993, and the economy was turning up and people were going out to eat more, and what Pizza Express offered at the time perfectly fitted with a lot of people's aspirations all around the country. So it was a virtuous circle of us opening more branches, them being popular, generating profits, enabling us to open still more. And I was very lucky in that we were able to buy control of such a tremendous business formula at a relatively young age.
So who inspired you when you started out on this path? Did you listen to yourself and only yourself, or did you have a role model or a mentor or somebody you wished you could be like?
There are a few entrepreneurs in the media industry that I admired. There was the late Sir Christopher Bland, who ran London Weekend Television and later on was chair of the BBC. There was Michael Green, who essentially created what is now ITV. In those days it was called Carlton. And I think there were less well-known figures whom I met over the years who, built their own businesses, who, inspired me in terms of the risk appetite and the initiative to do things for yourself, and the fearlessness that I think is sometimes required to take the plunge and not worry about the risk of failure, because you can, generally speaking, always pick yourself up and start over. It's especially if you're young without too many obligations, that's an ideal time to try things out and experiment and take risks with your career generally.
So we have a question from somebody called Andrew, who's asking, what are the main challenges leading a creative business? You ran Channel 4. So what are the main challenges leading a creative business as opposed to hospitality, where you've also had a lot of ventures?
I think with creative businesses, it's entirely about the people, rather than, say, in a restaurant, it's about the premises and the food and so forth. So, you have to pick and nurture and retain sometimes tricky individuals who can be very demanding and volatile sometimes, perhaps more than average, and don't necessarily like being told what to do. So keeping them motivated and working out how you can afford to reward them adequately is the challenge there. And I think, be it a design business or an architect or an advertising agency or a PR agency or any of these sorts of organizations, something in the entertainment business, it's almost invariably about the people and what drives them, and can you persuade them to do great work on your behalf. This
is one of your books. It's a brilliant read, Start It Up. So in Start It Up, you've got loads of your personal observations and experiences of building a business. Now, you've already told us that huge raft of competencies that make an ideal leader, but in Start It Up, you seem to be saying that if you think it through, people can do it. Do you believe that anybody can start a business if they're sufficiently motivated?
I think probably. I mean, for many, I'd say the vast majority of those who work for themselves, they're not going to employ others. They're not going to build a big business. They're not going to scale it up, as they say. And that's fine too. And my dad was a self-employed writer and always, since I can remember, worked for himself. Didn't employ anyone, but the satisfaction and the freedom and the ability to control your own destiny is what was important to him, rather than taking orders. And I think there is, in most of us, the desire to not simply work for the man and be part of a large organization. I think one of the great problems of big companies is bureaucracy and office politics. And I've had enough dealings with larger organizations to see that in action. And what can happen too often, I'm sad to say, is that mediocre people rise to the top because they are better at the games, but actually they're not necessarily the most effective individuals. So they do the politics awfully well, but they're not necessarily the inspiring ones who have the best ideas, if you see what I mean. And I think that's one of the shames of modern society, generally speaking. Businesses and government and so forth are bigger than ever. And, we don't always get the best people at the top, sadly. because, you know, for the reasons I've said, they don't necessarily have the most wonderful talents. It's more that they are good at playing the system.
So what I'm wondering is, so that you've told us what you think about good leadership, and that most people can start a business if they are sufficiently motivated. What I'm wondering is whether there's anything incompatible with good leadership. So I used to be in the Ministry of Defence, and I speak very carefully because of the Official Secrets Act. We used to send people to do, let's call them special duties. I was an operational military psychologist, and we used to have a profile, not necessarily of the characteristics we wanted to see in people that were doing special duties, but the characteristics we didn't want to see. And we would do psychometrics, we would do various other things, which I won't mention, but we had a definite profile of what we didn't want to see for that particular job. So when you're considering backing somebody or setting up a new venture, is there sort of in your head a checklist of things that you don't want to see, because that makes for a bad leader?
Yes, and I think that if you have serious doubts, then, you know, when you back someone with money, you're going into partnership with them, and it's a very long-term relationship, and it's not like taking on an employee where you know, you can let them go if they're in their probationary period, so to speak. If you partner with a founder and it doesn't work out, it's going to get messy and expensive. And obviously that has happened to me on various occasions. And, you know, I'd love to say that my judgment about people was impeccable, but it isn't. I have definitely made serious errors at certain points in my career, misjudging people, thinking they were more competent than they were, thinking they were honest when they weren't, etc. And it's, you know, very heartbreaking when you get these things wrong, particularly if people are disloyal or whatever. You know, you have to get over it, obviously. But I'd like to think there was a magic formula. I don't think there is. I've learned certainly that if your intuition, your gut instinct tells you there's something amiss early on, then listen to it. And although, you know, you can do psychometric testing and you can be relatively scientific about it, and obviously you can examine people's track records and qualifications and all the other things, references, so forth, that we do when we recruit people, I think we should not underestimate intuition, because I think quite often one's ability to sense that something is wrong, subconsciously almost, is more powerful than we give it credit for.
So sticking with that theme of motivation, we've got an intriguing question here from somebody called Ivy. I'm going to read the question as it's come in. I hope this is not a spelling mistake. Do you have any tips for a dentist who will like to set up a squat dental practice as a result of COVID-19? So I assume the question means somebody who perhaps wants to set something up really quickly, the motivation's there, and you know, there's an intent to work within the system. So do you have any tips for somebody who's got a motivation right now to do something that they consider to be entrepreneurial?
I think they should take the plunge. You know, there aren't many entrepreneurs I've met who've ever said to me, oh, I regret starting my own business, even if they've gone broke or they've made less money working for themselves than they did working for someone else. At the end of the day, I think the freedom, the independence, and the ability to control your own destiny is hard to beat. And, you know, so to speak, we only come this way but once. And if you have that hunger in you that says, you know, I want to give it a go, I want to go on an adventure and see if I can make it work, particularly if, you know, you are at a point in your life where you don't have too many responsibilities to others so that you can afford to take the risk, then I almost always say to people, go for it, because it may work, it may not, but even if it doesn't, you can try something else. And once you've got the taste for doing your own thing, it's very hard to give up. And it's been a defining characteristic of my life, and I would never, ever have wanted it another way. And I almost never envy people who work for other people or in big organizations. It just doesn't suit me. Obviously, it's right for some people, and it's important that, you know, people work in large institutions. I get that. But for those who have the inclination to be their own boss, then I always encourage them to go for it.
Luke, we've got loads of questions coming in on coronavirus, COVID-19, and your views. So let me try and put some of these together into a couple of overarching questions. So you spoke on Question Time fairly recently, expressing concern that people are perhaps not getting the health treatment that they need, and specifically, I think you mentioned cancer, and that we could, in your view, be entering not so much a recession as a depression. Do you still feel that that's the case, or have things moved on in recent weeks?
Well, the second point first. Unfortunately, I think it's got worse, not better, in terms of the economic outlook. Firstly, we're still in lockdown in 14 weeks, and each week takes its toll. Even today or yesterday, we've had about 10,000 job losses announced. And I do fear that we will have 4 or possibly 5 million unemployed in this country before we reach the bottom. Now, you know, we haven't had 4 to 5 million unemployed in this country for decades. And the misery and toll that takes, not just on the well-being of those who lose their jobs, but society as a whole, is immense. And, you know, it puts pressure on the national finances. I think it can lead to all sorts of adverse health outcomes. And, you know, there's an annual poll done by Gallup worldwide that asks people what's the most single important thing to them in their lives. And the number one answer always is to get a good job. And so for millions and millions of people, and it would be 3 or 4 million people potentially who would lose their job through this disaster, to go through the agony of unemployment, which might become permanent structural unemployment for them, I think is a, you know, dreadful consequence of this coronavirus, and it will be a very long-term inheritance. And I think it's only now starting to become, you know, visible to a lot of people. And I think it will start to dominate the headlines in the coming months and possibly years, as we realize that, you know, you can't just put organizations and businesses into induced comas, as we did in March, and expect them to revive instantly and everything be back to normal. Every single business I know, including some of mine, even ones that are doing quite well, are making redundancies because, as they say, you know, never let a good crisis go to waste. And so everyone is becoming lean and mean. And all these people being thrown on the scrap heap are going to have to, you know, possibly retrain. Maybe some of them are in middle age, and it's very difficult to cope with the idea of being thrown out of work, the damage to human dignity and things. And, you know, for those who perhaps are in the public sector who are not concerned about unemployment because their job isn't threatened, what I would say is that we have 9 million people on furlough now, and I think millions of them will not come back to a job, and that is very tragic.
So you mentioned the jobs misery there, and in fact, in your Sunday Times column, you recently wrote an open letter to the Prime Minister. So on that theme of the jobs misery, if he were listening tonight, or indeed he may be, what would you like to say at this point in time now in relation to jobs?
I think the country has got itself into a terrible funk. We have become incredibly frightened. There was an Ipsos Mori poll very recently that said of 28 countries, we were the most frightened of COVID. And I think that the one outstandingly successful policy the government's pursued through this period has been its propaganda frightening us, combined with a pretty hysterical media. So I think we have to turn that tide. We have to get people to think about some other things apart from COVID. We have to tone down the panic, because I think a fearful society is not one that can progress. And we have to get the disease in proportion and realize that there are other factors in life, such as, for example, cancer and heart disease, and that people shouldn't be so afraid of hospitals that they daren't go and get treatments, which relates to your point earlier about hundreds of thousands of people missing out diagnoses and treatments for cancer, for example, which in the months and years to come may have, very severe consequences. And we need to, be less fearful and slightly more self-confident and less obsessive about the daily death toll, and get it rather more in proportion. Because I fear for the last 3 or 4 months in our isolation, we've become very hypochondriac and very obsessive. And I think that in itself is extremely bad for us.
Great question here from somebody. Unfortunately, whoever has asked this question, I've put my pen through your name, but you'll recognize the question. Luke, if you had been on stage, what would your input have been on handling the COVID pandemic?
Well, it is a very good question, and I'm not sure I have the right answer. I suppose and everyone's a genius in hindsight, I think we should have locked down our borders earlier in January and February, because I think then we would have had far fewer incoming travellers who had the disease. I think we should probably not have done a countrywide total lockdown, but I think what we should have done is protect the vulnerable, which we knew from the very early days that the elderly and those with other illnesses were the most likely to be victims. And I think the tragedy that's happened in our nursing homes, where patients were introduced from hospitals without testing, and therefore, some of them infected, to then go on and infect other people in the nursing homes, is the biggest tragedy of all in this illness or this crisis. Clearly, we didn't have the testing capacity. And I wonder whether organisations like Public Health England were welcoming enough of the private capacity out there to test, because I think if we had embraced that earlier, we would have perhaps been better equipped to test, so that, for example, people being decanted from hospitals in order to, create more bed space into nursing homes could have been tested first, because I think introducing infected people into nursing homes was a terrible error. I accept all these things are wisdom with hindsight, but I do wonder whether, because we embraced fully a complete national lockdown, we took our eye off the ball as regards the vulnerable, because I think everyone now accepts that healthy people under the age, I'm 58, people younger than me who are healthy are, generally speaking, not going to die from this disease, but yet the whole nation's been locked up, and a good proportion of us have not been able to work. And I think that's got all sorts of damaging consequences, not just the ones I talked about earlier of the toll of unemployment and insolvencies, but also for our national finances. We now have 2 billion of national debt, and we have to work out how we're going to pay for the NHS and all the other public services that we want to improve and spend more money on, when I think it's possible that the UK economy this year will shrink more than any other major economy, because I think, A, we've had a very long lockdown, which has its own economic toll, but B, we are more frightened than any other country. So I think recovering from this lockdown will be harder for us. And so I think the cost will be greater. And that all means that we will end up with more debt, which ultimately will have to be repaid. Even if interest rates are low, you still ultimately have to repay the debt.
Luke, it's a very tall order for any government in the world. Let's stick with our government. It's very, very difficult for our government to balance the needs of the economy and the health of the nation. Indeed, should they be balanced, or does one take priority over the other? And there are many different arguments, aren't there? Do you think, knowing what we know now, that actually different decisions should have been made right at the very beginning? Obviously, that's post hoc rationalization, but if we had more information, do you think there were other ways of handling it at the start of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think that probably the key committees feeding in views and advice should have been more than just, so to speak, the scientists and the science, because I don't think you can say lives at any cost. The NHS doesn't do that. NICE doesn't decide which drugs to recommend based, excluding the cost. Of course, it takes cost into account. You know, the NHS has a fixed budget of 140 billion a year it is. So it can't just do whatever treatments and procedures that people want. And there is always going to be rationing. And I think that we should have had economists and even philosophers and business people feeding in to the government in a formal way in terms of advice, rather than exclusively scientists and clinicians who, you know, essentially had to take no account of the vast disruption, unprecedented disruption that lockdowns caused, and indeed the colossal infringement of our liberties, which I think is a you know, unprecedented and frightening move, which, you know, even in wartime, there was less totalitarian stuff going on that we now have. And I just feel somehow that it's, you know, it's overreach by government. And even lockdown itself, I think, you know, there's very little research to say that it's, you know, proven to succeed. You know, there's some research been done since, but a lot of the papers have been produced on COVID since it started at very low quality. So I don't think we can necessarily take them as proving that it's necessary, that there is serious evidence that it's truly effective. And the cost of it is colossal and should not be underestimated.
Question here from David Babs. If there was one thing you could do to reform the NHS, so moving slightly away from COVID, so if there was one thing you could do to reform the NHS, which is probably the largest bureaucracy in the country and one of the largest organisations in the world, what would it be?
I would try to make, within reason, every single leader of every single health trust or foundation a clinician. Now, I'm not sure the very latest stats, but a few years ago, I spoke at the event for the chairs of all the foundation chairs and trust chairs, and the percentage of trusts that where the chief executives were clinicians was small. I mean, it was under 5%. And, you know, generally speaking, the cleverest people in hospitals are the doctors. And, you know, to a degree, they're also the key individuals in the whole system. And they should be running the show, but all too often, either they don't want to, or they're not chosen for whatever reason. And I think this is a grave flaw in the system, and I don't know how to fix it. But I think if you put clinicians in charge, the right ones, obviously, who wanted to do the job, then I think that might make a hell of a difference.
So people see you as an entrepreneur, but as you're talking to us, your experience in the health sector is obviously coming out, and indeed you are the chair of the Institute of Cancer Research. Can you tell us how you got into that role and what you found rewarding in that?
Well, a headhunter phoned me up and picked me. I'm not sure they had a long queue of people after the job, actually. I mean, obviously it's pro bono. It's, you know, it's a wonderful organization, world leading. It's been going over a century. It is, you know, based on 2 campuses, and it's essentially the sister organization of the Royal Marsden Hospital, as you know, all your audience will know, is the leading cancer hospital in the UK. And between us, we are one of the world's great cancer centres for treatment and research. And we have a particular strength in drug discovery. And I think it's been fascinating to learn more about that over the last 7 or 8 years, to work with the brilliant scientists and clinicians who work with us in the Royal Marsden, and to try and help the cause in whatever way one can by, making the right appointments and setting strategy and helping to raise money and so forth. And the thing that you realize when you're involved in that particular field of medicine is that developing drugs takes an incredibly long time, too long. And I think one of the few possible silver linings of this awful period, the pandemic, with this incredible race to find a vaccine, which we may never find, but we all pray and hope we do, is that it may lead to the acceleration of drugs, because typically I think bringing new drugs from first discovery through all the trials, phase 1, 2 and 3, etc., to be widely available to patients to deliver public good can be 15 years or more, and it's too long for people to wait. And obviously drugs must be safe, but again, you have to balance patient safety with patient good. And I think that perhaps post this terrible period, the regulators all around the world will find ways to accelerate the introduction of the right drugs, with the necessary safety protocols, because I think society needs to develop things like vaccines and drugs more quickly. It will A, save money, and B, it will obviously deliver health-saving treatments to sick people quicker.
So you sit as the current chair of the Institute of Cancer Research, and I know you've had that role for a number of years, but you then have all your business ventures. You've had a huge disparity in what you've done in the sense that you've been involved in so many sectors. What ambitions do you still have? Is there still another sector you would like to be involved in, or another role you'd like to do, or some hobby you want to pursue that you've not been able to yet? What does the future hold for you?
I don't know. I think firstly, we as a nation have to get out of this hole and right ourselves, if you like, so that we can get back to work and fix the problems. So I think that's the most immediate and pressing concern for all of us, frankly. I think longer term, I would like to be involved in lots of other areas that I wouldn't necessarily pick one. I'm agnostic. I think, if it's interesting, the people are able and trustworthy, and if the opportunity looks exciting, then I'm willing to look at it. I think I step down from the Institute of Cancer Research next year, and I think possibly post that, I'd perhaps like to continue in that field of cancer treatment in some way, possibly through a business, possibly through a charity or what have you. I'm not sure, because I've enjoyed it and I think it's incredibly important field. So I think I'd like to do that. And I'd like to keep working. My father worked until his mid-80s, and I would like to do the same. I don't really believe personally in the conventional idea of retirement, especially in this era. I think that for those who are, hungry and ambitious and have the idea that they need a reason to get up in the morning, a purpose, then they should keep working in one form or another, even if it's for a non-profit, because it gives you a role and a usefulness that I think most of us need one way or another.
What about hobbies and interests? Do you have any? Do you have time for anything non-work related?
Well, I have 3 children and a wonderful wife who works for the NHS. I write a weekly column in the newspaper. I have in the past written a few books, play a bit of tennis. I guess that's about it, really.
What are you reading at the moment?
What am I reading? I'm reading a thriller by The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler. Very good it is.
You spoke there very briefly about being a dad. So you've been involved in homeschooling of late?
I have, yes. Yes, because my wife was, going every day to the hospital. So I was doing the homeschooling for a certain period, and the two slightly older ones who are 13 and 15, they were all right. But the 10-year-old, that was hard work.
So
I'm quite impressed by teachers, actually, because keeping control of a whole class of 10-year-olds, yeah, that'd be beyond me for sure.
yes, I've actually got 7 children. One of them's too young to go to school. One of them's a baby. 2 of them are grown up and have got jobs. So there's been 4 in the house who have been homeschooled, and it certainly does make you go back to basics, and it takes multitasking to a whole different level, doesn't it? When you have to weigh equally your business responsibilities and your parental responsibilities.
If you're working and doing the homeschooling, yeah, something often gives. It's not perfect, no.
So what do you do then in moments of high stress? So let's take the children out of it now, nothing to do with parenting, but in moments of real high stress, what do you do? How do you help yourself?
Well, I'm sad to say that one of my great weaknesses is I have a temper, so I will lose it. What I have learned over the years is that if I can feel, I'm losing my rag, then I will occasionally step out of the room and, wander off and go and have a coffee for 10 minutes or something and calm down a bit. And sometimes that will help, reduce the temperature. Also, another way, actually, of diffusing things if, things are very stressful and anxious is to make jokes and make light of it and laugh. And if you can tease the other person or vice versa, and that then, is a good solution. And then you get back to, you get things in proportion more, because unfortunately, I'm very capable of getting things out of proportion when I'm out of sorts, and that leads to mistakes and upset, and it's generally speaking a bad thing.
Yeah, and as a psychologist, I think I would say one of the opposite traits of a temper is humour, and bringing humour into work situations can be good, and sometimes being able to look at a work situation and see the lighter side of it. Is there anything, looking back on your various endeavours, that stands out for you as a truly funny moment in your career?
I'm sure there is, and I have to try and think of one.
Something that really made you laugh.
Nothing comes to mind. I'm sorry. I wish it did, and I can't think of anything. There are lots of laughs every day, you hope. And I think, as they say, a day without laughter is not a good one, is it? And I think one of the traits that you notice in business people or colleagues that you would partner with is, do they have a sense of humour? Because if they don't, that's not a good sign.
A very good question here. I'm just changing tack now. Somebody called Jill has emailed in with this question. I was self-employed for 10 years, gave it up as I ran out of money. I'm just not a salesperson. Is that key?
I think it's pretty important. It's not always vital. And one of the solutions is obviously if you can find someone to partner with who is good at sales. So if you have other talents and skills, then can you find someone else to work with who has got the confidence or the chutzpah to do the selling? I would say that sales, i.e. generating sales, is the thing that, most businesses that don't work fail to do. They don't generate enough sales. And so having someone to hustle is pretty crucial. And I would say that most successful entrepreneurs are hustlers, but some are not. Some are more introspective and thoughtful and quiet, but bring other vital things to the party. And they probably need someone who's got that hustle to work alongside them.
So Jill says, and you've just answered it very well, that she's not a salesperson, and asks if that's key. So if you were being a psychoanalyst of yourself, Luke, what would you say you're not? Is there anything you would like to be a bit more of?
I'm not the world's best people manager. And I think if I had my time again, I would invest more time in, engaging with people and motivating them better and cultivating them. And I think, building teams and seeing people go on to great success is one of the satisfactions of being in business. And I think, I possibly haven't put enough effort into that side of my work.
Great question here from somebody called Natalie. Looks like the food chain expansion was in the center of your success. Which type of business do you think would be most needed in the next decade? So let's assume that that's coming out of COVID-19 related to what we've been through. So what type of business do you think is most going to be needed in the next decade?
Well, inevitably it's healthcare, isn't it? Because we're all getting older. I'm afraid to say we're all getting more hypochondriac, which isn't necessarily a good thing. There are constant new techniques and medicines and so forth that are being discovered and invented and pioneered to treat the various illnesses of particularly chronic ones of age. And, I think that when people are ill, they will spend their last penny, or even a society, you might say, which is what we've been doing, on addressing the illness. Nothing else matters. So I think the sky is the limit for the size of the healthcare markets, be it a pharmaceutical business or clinics or anything in between. And although we have the NHS in this country, there are very many other areas of healthcare that the NHS, it either uses private suppliers or it works with them, or as in sectors like dentistry, where private dentistry is now bigger than NHS dentistry. And so I would say healthcare, which of course, many of the Royal Society's members are suitably equipped to go into. And I'm surprised at how few doctors go into business, actually. More should.
Now we've got to wrap up in a couple of minutes, Luke, but these questions are coming in. So I'm just going to try now and pick one or two that wrap up into a theme. And that theme, I'm guessing, is governance. So I want to take you very briefly, because we haven't got very more minutes, onto governance. And I'm going to ask a question from somebody called Michelle. As she says, the late Tiny Rowland described non-executive directors as baubles on a Christmas tree in business. So what do you think is the key to getting the relationship right between the executive and the non-executive members of a board?
Well, clearly it's picking the right people in the first place. And I like to think that I've picked quite a lot of non-execs over the years, and I like to pick ones that add something in terms of their domain knowledge, but also are willing to challenge, because I think the risk with boards is you get groupthink, and then things can go wrong, and you need diversity of opinions and backgrounds and skills and industrial or whatever experience, and that way you are more likely to get a mixed view, which I think will probably come to better conclusions.
Thank you for that. And we could go on, and in fact, to all those people, all those unanswered questions, I've literally got dozens of pieces of paper here. I would say read Luke's Sunday Times columns. They're brilliant. I really look forward to them every Sunday. And Luke, before we close tonight, I would like to know, do you have a favorite saying or a proverb that you would like to leave the audience with?
Well, for my wife, I wanted to motivate her about things, so I commissioned a neon sign that says "Seize the Day." And I know it's a hackneyed phrase, but I think it's hard to beat. And I think all of us need reminding of it frequently. I don't just mean about business opportunities, but I mean about living in the present. One of the great things about children, which you will, I'm sure, agree with, is they're not worrying about the past or planning the future. They're living in the moment. And to a degree, that's also what Seize the Day is about, isn't it? It's about living for the day. And, this is life. We need to remember that frequently, because it's not a rehearsal.
Luke, that's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. You've been a really interesting and inspiring and a provocative guest. So thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you have not been charged for tonight's webinar. Indeed, and if you wish, we're inviting you to support the RSM in these unprecedented times so that we may support others. If you'd like to make a donation, please go to support us on our website or follow the link on your screen. And any donations you give us will directly fund the RSM's vision, which is to advance health through education and innovation. So I'd like to thank you all for your generosity and for your time, and to Luke, and thank you very much to everybody for being a part of RSM's In Conversation series. Good night.